should say navigation to CTP, NAVO1 to NAVO3.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, great. What we're going to talk about today is the current navigation offer at Sea Cadets, what's currently in and available to both volunteers and to cadets. We're going to walk through, and I'm going to try and do it in not too much detail. It'll end up taking hours to go through it, but also enough detail that if you're someone who's looked at it and wants a bit more guidance on it, it will hopefully make a bit more sense if there's any bits that you are confused about, and then have some time to answer questions. Where there are quite a few people in the meeting, if you're right to put them into put questions into the chat if possible, so then I don't have to scroll back through into the chat. So if you have questions, please post them into the chat and I'll come back to them as soon as I can. Lovely. So first point is, when we talk about navigation at Sea Cadets, one of the key elements is that we absolutely want to make it clear that we think that navigation is a really vital skill for all of our cadets to have some understanding of. It's not just to say that some cadets should have it. Actually, we are the Sea Cadets, the sea being a massive part of that, and navigation is a really key skill. So what we want to do with the CTP sessions is to provide the base level of knowledge before people start to complete their boating and their beyond unit activity, knowing that doing your navigation in a unit setting is not going to make you an expert in navigation, but it provides that base level of information so that when you then go and do your boating with your boating instructors, you will be able to then use that in the boating, and they will be able to reference what you've already covered in your unit when you go out and do that boating, or when you go to inshore boating. So our inshore boating teams know that these are the outcomes that will be covered, and so if someone is at that cadet level, they can start to talk about those topics, and it gives sort of that head start when you go and do powerboat level 2, for example, whatever it might be that you go and do beyond unit. The other key point is that our instructors at units are already increasingly upskilled through RWA qualifications, so that every unit that I've been to has had boating instructors who already have qualifications. A lot of the times the feedback that we were getting was that there's a lot of people who come in and are civilian instructors and do the boating during the summer, and maybe don't have stuff that they do as often in the winter. This can be a way to keep them engaged throughout the winter period. But also we have the essential navigation and seamanship course, which we have had an unprecedented amount of people going through over the last year. But there are huge numbers of people that have been through that. In terms of the people on this call, I'm just trying to make sure I can see as many of you as possible. Could you give me a sort of a nod or a thumbs up if you have heard of essential navigation and seamanship, the ENS course, just so I can get a sense that of what group of people have heard of it. Okay, so there's a lot of people are nodding or putting thumbs up there. That's really useful. Because yes, we've seen lots and lots of people going through that, and it provides a great basis that you can then use, and it has all of the skills that you would need to be able to deliver at this lower level, base level of navigation, which is really, really useful. And also our cadets can complete it as well. So either our senior cadets or the cadets who are going through this process can use that as well. Indoor boating as well is symbiotic with a CTP. What was often looked at was saying that actually when you go boating, you don't necessarily have to know your navigation. If it previously, when you went on basic navigation, the people who went on and did their boating didn't necessarily have to have those skills. So actually putting that level so that when you do your boating, you talk about exactly the same elements, the same topics. And then offshore is also a really great way that we can demonstrate these skills and actually use a lot of the technology and that digital first element of it in the offshore syllabus. We're currently looking at the power vessel syllabus, so the new syllabus that will be coming out when people go on the power vessels in next year's set of voyages will be directly linked to the CTP sessions. So you will be able to either complete elements of these offshore or practice them and do them practically. And then, as I mentioned before, the essential navigation and seamanship qualification is really, really useful on that. There's a couple of questions that have come in the chat as we were speaking. Ian, if you've already been in this, Ian Howard, if you've already been in the session on Monday, you're welcome to drop off. It will be the same content as Monday. And then, yes, the essential navigation and seamanship. I'll put a link into the chat in a little bit, but there's a link to how you can register for it. It's an online RYA course that you can complete, and it provides you with a lot of resources. If you're a part of the course, you can register onto it. You can get training charts, and the navigation almanac and some of that stuff as well comes in paper form as well to support with it. But yes, the key element, and when we talk about navigation, we want to ensure that navigation is throughout the Sea Cadet experience. So at all levels of the CTP, whenever you go offshore, when you do your powerboat or all of your inshore courses, and then through the essential navigation and seamanship, so that there is no way that you are going to be able to go through your Sea Cadet experience and not have some element of that navigation program that you engage with. What did we consider when we were looking at the CTP modules? First thing was talking to inshore boating team and to boating instructors at unit level and saying, actually, what are the basics that would be really useful for cadets to come along with when they come and do the boating activity with you? And then looking at what resources are actually available to the majority of units. I'll talk a bit more about this in a minute because we actually made some changes recently based on the feedback from lots of you, maybe some of the people in this call who were doing it at units and actually said we do have more resources that we can use. Then also asking, can we include all of the learning outcomes from the previously existing basic navigation course through the CTP and inshore boating, as hopefully you will have seen in the announcements a year and a bit ago. We tracked all of the outcomes from basic navigation to make sure they're included either in this bit in powerboat level, in the initial powerboat module, or in the offshore syllabus, and then making sure that we can build in offshore experience as well, so that if you don't go offshore, you also get some of this experience, but also moving closer to, if any of you are RWA instructors, you'll know that they talk a lot about digital first as being one of the key elements that we're moving towards. So making sure that we can move closer to talking about the digital experience and digital technology and how that supports the navigation alongside the traditional navigation elements that we talk about anyway. Lovely. So there's another couple of questions in the chat. Pam, the RPLE for cadets is going to change. Pam's put a question in to say, do the cadets need to complete the modules if they have the ENS course, or can they be signed up? We're going to put out the RPLE guidance. We're just checking it, but it will almost certainly be that they will be able to be awarded the CTP modules if they've completed the ENS. But when should you start delivering? So you can absolutely start delivering these now. A lot of people have. We've already started receiving feedback and little bits that we've been able to tweak. But we had a lot of feedback from unit training officers to say that if we were to put this out at a random point in the year, that's obviously going to impact your training plans and your training schedules. So what we have committed to as a development team is that we will not put out any new modules or any updates or changes to CTP or CTS or the junior syllabus apart from at 2 points within the year. So if any of you here are UTOs, you can be sure with your training plan that it will not need to change at any point between that. So we will only ever put out updates in April and September each year. That's not necessarily saying that we will definitely put any updates or changes in April and September, but if there are any, you know to check in April or September. That'll be the only time that we ever do updates to what would impact your training plans. We also, there was a question that came through from someone when they registered asking whether cadet progress will be affected if they're in higher ranks. Once you have been promoted, the awarding of the eligible for promotion to cadet first class in this case will never be rescinded. So once you've completed that, and once you've been promoted, you won't have to go back and complete modules. That will never happen on Westminster, though if people are wanting to cover some of these elements, you can absolutely say come and join the cadet session if that's something that they're interested in doing, but it absolutely won't disappear from their Westminster. And then the other element is that we absolutely take all of your feedback on board. It was piloted and worked with a smaller working group of both people who work in the inshore team, the offshore team, and volunteers who do boating at unit level. But the group of people who are now testing this is all of you, and each of your units are different, and each of your cadet groups are different. So it's great to hear feedback from you, and we want to not have a case where in 5 years' time, it becomes out of date and we suddenly have to do a complete refresh. We want it to be that we're iteratively improving on it. So anytime that you have feedback on it, please let us know, send it through using the feedback survey on the courses, and we will absolutely take those and make sure that it's continuously improving throughout the process. So what I'm going to do now is walk through the activities in here. I'll try to do it fairly quickly, but give you as much of a sense as I possibly can of what the activities are. Can I just get a sense from the people who I can see? Have you had a look through session plans already? No? So that's a mixture of yes and no's. That's perfect. That's probably exactly what we're looking for. There are 3 new modules. One of them is about basic collision regulations or rules of the road, or IRPCS. The second one is an introduction to chart, and the third one is an introduction to tides. I'm going to go through them one at a time and have a walk through what some of the activities are. The first one, which is about basic collision regulations, the objectives for it are to list the terms of IRPCS and then understand the guidelines, understand the importance of lookout, safe speed, and action to avoid, and demonstrate the importance of understanding risk of collision. This is not to say that once you've completed this, you are fully signed off, you know your IRPCS back to front. We still want it to be that when you go boating, your boating instructors are supporting you with this. It's not saying, oh yeah, you can get in a boat now. You are perfect with your IRPCS. We still need support. But it's introducing them to it. So once they actually go on the water, they can see how it practically works. And so there's a few bits in terms of these instructor notes. So we have an instructor resource, which I will load up but show you in a second, that will support with teaching assessment. It has some simplified explanations of some of the rules, and also gives you a bit of a glossary. So in here, it's got a glossary of some of the key terms. So IRPCS, port starboard tacking, a link to the safe speed card that we'll talk about in a second, and some guidance about what that is, and then also a link to how you could set up the room so that you can do these activities practically. Then the other element is, in terms of where possible, utilising experienced boating instructors if you have them to deliver this, because most units will have people who deliver that. If it can be the same person delivering in the unit as then takes them out on the boat, they know exactly what that level of competence is when they're in the classroom setting, and they can then support them when they go out on the water. But also those that have completed the RYA ENS that we've already talked about. And then here's the link for if anyone is looking to complete their RYA Essential Navigation and Seamanship course. You can do it through a form on the TNA page. And then there are enrolment courses on Westminster that you can use to look on if you or anyone in your unit is looking to do that. If anyone gets more questions on that, feel free to pop them into the chat. So the first bit is just introducing to, oh, actually, I've noticed a spelling mistake in there, introduction. That will be changed after this. Introduction to IRPCS. So the key thing here is knowing that actually when you go and speak to different people call it different things. Over the last few months, I've heard people refer to it as IRPCS, coal regs, collision regs, rules of the road on the water. So it will be known as different elements, but it's letting them know that what it actually stands for, what it means, and that every vessel will follow IRPCS, but you might hear it called coal regs, collision regs, rules of the road, etc. And then we do activities which are based on some of the rules within that. So the first one being lookout. There are 2 different options for this based on sizes. We had some feedback that the initial one was actually much harder to do if you're in a very small classroom. So if you do have the space, it's setting up around the space a series of hazards that you've already set up. So it could be rocks, it could be a powerboat, it could be a sailing boat. And then what you ask them to do is they set up their own vessel. So you have someone who is the driver who can only look directly ahead. You have someone who is the port lookout who can only look directly to the port or left. And you have a starboard lookout who can only look to starboard or right. And they have to move around the space. And if someone on the port side sees a hazard, they have to then report it to the driver, who then has to say that they have heard it and repeat it back to practice to make sure that you actually get that communication when you're on a vessel. You may be saying there's a hazard, they haven't heard, you assume they've heard. It's making sure that you have that feedback loop. The example being sailing boat on starboard side, driver saying confirmed heard, sailing boat on starboard side. So that's simple hazard perception. And then if you don't have that space, which I know a lot of people for cadets will often use a smaller classroom, having a series of hazards that are written down on cards, and then they stay still, but you hold up the hazards, change the hazard, hold up a different hazard, change the hazard, hold up a different hazard. And when they see you hold it up, then they do their lookout response for it. Hopefully that makes sense. The next one is in terms of safe speed. So in this one here, we're looking at not a particular speed in terms of knots, but actually, are you going to stop? Are you going to go slow? Are you going to go at a medium pace, or are you going to be able to go as fast as you want in this situation? So we have a series of safe speed cards, but also if you have access to be able to show it on a screen, we have ready-made safe speed presentations. The idea being that you ask them what they think. If you are in a paddle vessel, for example, and it's really sunny and there's perfect visibility, what do you think is going to be the best speed for you to be going at? And obviously in this case, you can go as fast as you want. In this case, there's no other traffic. There's good visibility. You're going to be able to go fast. If we're in a position where you're in a sailing vessel and it's cloudy, there's some light wind and some light fog, so there's some visibility, but no other vessel, we might want to go slower because there's only some visibility. The visibility is worse. It then goes on through a series of different ones and then introduces other traffic. So to say if there is another traffic, is there another sailing vessel, what would that do to your speed? And then if you don't have access to that, but you have access to a printer, we have safe speed cards, which are the same thing, but they would be able to draw their own scenarios. So you can print them out and draw one from your vessel, one from your weather, one from visibility, one from traffic, and then they create their own scenarios. And then in the instructor resources, there's some guidance about how you can do that activity. Then the next one is in terms of risk of collision. So there is a guide to how you can set up your room, which looks a bit like this. So having upstream and downstream, and then a buoy in the middle. Someone has asked whether we can put a PPT or a PDF. Yeah, absolutely. I don't know who that is, but yes, we will. I can put that onto a downloadable PowerPoint and also into a PDF version if you want to print it out. Yes, you can set it up with this. And so for the first step, you will have people moving upstream, people moving downstream. Each of the blue dots is a cadet. The arrows point in direction of travel. And in this case, you ask, okay, if this is the situation, is there a risk of collision? If they're moving at the same speed, no, not a risk of collision because they're all moving at the same speed in the same direction. And then changing to this one here, where now we actually have someone coming into downstream. Is there a risk of collision in this case? Yes. Then asking someone to be tacking, moving diagonally across. And is there a risk of collision in this case? Yes. Then if someone is moving faster down the same upstream, is there a risk of collision? Yes. It's using scenarios, getting them to act them out in practice. They can actually see that there is a risk of collision when they do those elements. It's to get them to think about the importance of risk of collision. Why is it important that we think about it? Because it's all of these situations, apart from when you are moving at the same speed in the same direction, there is a risk of collision. Then we have action to avoid, which you're using exactly the same scenario as in the previous activity, but then saying that you have one cadet joining at a right angle and saying giving them the 4 different options so they can decide what they're going to do. Do you think that you should go faster and get in front of the cadet that's joining in? Do you think you should change direction to face the same direction that they are? Do you think you should slow down until they've gone past, or do you think you should stop until they've gone past? You can try out each of those elements of the scenario, which one is going to be the safest. Obviously, the correct answer being slowing down or stopping if needed. Then having someone tacking, so moving as zigzags across the room, and then asking the same question. Do you slow down? Do you stop? Do you speed up? Or do you also change direction to zigzag across the area? Answer being to slow down. Obviously, it could be to stop, but staying at a slow, steady speed ensures you're aware of your surroundings and you can move out of the way if the sailboat tacks in your direction. And then the last one being overtaking, which is if there's a cadet moving normally at a safe speed and an overtaker has to pass them, which side do you pass on? And then if you are the cadet being overtaken, what should you do? Change direction, slow down, speed up, stop, or keep your speed and direction. And then you can test out some of those options, see which one they think is going to be most dangerous, making sure that you then clarify that the person who is being overtaken should be keeping their speed and direction. And then the last one, getting them to think about which one of those do they think is going to be the most important one, the one they're going to definitely remember, and then to present back about what they learned from the session. That's the first session there. The second one is all about an introduction to charts. So first of all is explaining what you might find on a navigation chart. Second one is about listing the different formats that a 2D chart can take. And then the third one is discussing the benefits and drawbacks of each type of chart. Again, exactly the same bit here about utilising experienced voting instructors where you can, or people that have done the ENS. And then this is a bit that we changed slightly, and you'll see that the presentation has changed because the feedback that we got from the initial people who tried this out in units was actually that a lot of units either have access to old paper charts that they've used in the past, or if they've done the ENS, they have access to that training chart that we use during the ENS training. So actually, a lot of people do have paper charts. It'd be interesting to get your feedback on whether you think that reflects what it's like in your unit. But if you have paper charts, you can we've changed it to say if you have those, use those alongside this, so they can actually get hands on with a chart in front of them and find the elements within a single chart that you would have in the unit. We also again, I can't remember who was put the feedback in the chat, but we have the PowerPoint as a downloadable PowerPoint, but we also have a printable version of it if you want to use it if you don't have access to a screen to show that. So it starts off with what's quite a fun warm up to get them thinking about what a chart is and what a map is. And so it's asking them to take a Satsuma and a marker pen and drawing a world map on the Satsuma, and then peeling it and flattening it to try and to see whether it still maintains the shape of the Earth and the world map. And then just clarifying that actually, when we turn something 3D into something 2D, there are some changes that will have to happen to the map. This is an introduction to get them talking and thinking about it, but it's from when we've tried it, the cadets have had had a good time doing that one. Then the second one is saying that just like we have paper maps and Google Maps that we might use to navigate on land, we also need to have special maps to navigate on water, and these are called charts, and they include some different elements than we might have on our land-based maps. First of all, asking them to think about what we might need to include, so that it'll give you a sense of what they already might know, because they might already know a lot of this information. That makes it much easier for you. But to ask them what they think would be included, then splitting them into two separate teams, giving each a piece of paper and asking them to write down their answers before you give the answer, marking whether they got it right. So we have a PowerPoint, which I'm going to load up. I might have to, hopefully you'll still be able to see this on the screen. Can you still see that on my screen? Give me a nod if you can see the PowerPoint. Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Leslie. So the chart, so first of all, saying what does this tell us? And hopefully you'll get the answer that will show that which section of the world map the chart will be showing us. And then if you have your paper chart, sorry, you would be able to then say, now can you go and find that on our chart? Where is our chart referring to? What does this tell us? Looking at the scale, and then obviously this being the scale of the map or the chart, meaning that 1 centimeter equals 75,000 centimeters equals 750 meters. And then you can look and see if it's the same on the paper chart that you have. What does the yellow part show us? Hopefully you'll get the answer from them that the yellow on the chart shows land. I really hope that then none of them are going to be trying to navigate their vessels across the yellow bit. But then also asking them to then have a look at their chart, the paper chart, and see if they can find if there's any land shown on that. What do the blue and white colours show? The blue and white colours show either shallow water or they show deep water. Then what do the green sections show? These are areas that are not always or usually not covered with water, depending on the tide. And then what do these numbers on the chart show? And then obviously talking that this here is the lowest depth of the water that you will have in the water. So in this case, this one here being 8.3 meters being the lowest that water would be. And then this one, what does this show? Saying this is actually a different one, but moving towards a digital piece of saying that this is actually a digital chart from T.S. John Jerwood's Bridge. Digital charts show the same data as the paper charts, but through a computer or a phone, and they can be moved or zoomed in and out. So looking at those as our key elements. And then we start to move on to talk about digital charts, saying that today digital charts are used over paper charts by a majority of navigators. One reason is the ease with which you can zoom in and out to see different levels of detail depending on what task you're trying to complete. So then you can show them that comparison between the two elements of that chart that I just showed you, and what's the difference between these two bits, one of them being more zoomed in, one of them being more zoomed out, and then asking why is zoomed in useful, why is zoomed out useful, and then there's some scenarios where you would ask them whether they would want to zoom in their digital chart or zoom out if they were going to be trying to do that task. Then, and this is something that we have, when we tested it, the cadets actually came up with a lot of ideas that I hadn't even had on the list. But this is asking them to think about paper and digital charts, and Group A having to argue for the advantages of paper charts over digital charts, and then B having to argue for the advantages of digital charts over paper charts. So talking about various different elements, there are also prompts within the instructor notes to give you some ideas of what those answers could be if they're struggling to come to work out those answers. And then the last bit is to explain that when you get a chance to see paper charts, if you do, you will see that they only represent a section of our water on our planet. Once you reach the edge of one chart, you're going to have to get out your next chart and put it down to carry on. So what they will do now is a cool down session, which is creating their own set of paper charts for a river, though with much less detail. So either using one of the rivers in the river printout. So for example, it could be this river that you may or may not recognize. Or if you want to, you can get an image of a river that they will know that you boat on or that is nearby to the unit. And they have to turn that into a series of 8 charts, splitting that up and then pass it over to the next team, who then have to solve that puzzle to create the full river again. So that is our introduction to charts. And then the last one is an introduction to tides. So first point in this is explaining why tides are important for navigators, then explaining how you can find tidal information, describing flood and ebb, and describing springs and neaps. Exactly the same as the other ones, utilising your boating instructors or those that complete DNS. First bit is asking why tides are important. So showing the images of Lindisfarne. So hopefully you've all heard of Lindisfarne. Lindisfarne is the island in Northumberland. Am I right about that?
Northumberland.
Yes. Okay. Good. 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 Where it's tidal, so that when the tide is in, you are not able to get across the crossing. When the tide is out, you are able to. There's an example of both sides of that, and also a video where you can show it in sped up time. Coming in and asking what's the difference between those two bits. Hopefully, from general knowledge, they'll be able to tell you that that's because one shows high tide, one shows low tide. But yes, then explaining that at high tide it covers the causeway, so you need a boat, and this tidal change usually happens twice a day, driven by the moon's gravitational pull. That's as much as you need to go into the reasons behind tide, unless you have time. There is an activity at the end where you can talk a lot more about the science behind it if that's what they're interested in. There's a physical way that you can do that. But then doing them into groups and asking them why they think it's important for different groups to know about tides. So group one, sea cadets and surfers. Group two, beachgoers and navigators. There are some examples of what we think could be the reasons, but you never know what cadets are going to come up with as the potential reasons. So you can support them with some of these prompts. Then doing a flood and ebb, Simon says, so explaining that flood means the sea level rising, water moving towards the shore. Ebb means sea level falling, water moving away from the shore. Spring tide can be either flood or ebb, but is when the tide is strongest, and neap can be either flood or ebb, but is the time when it's at its weakest. And so when you say flood, cadets walk forward past the chairs. When you say ebb, cadets walk back. When you say spring, ebb or flood, they must walk backwards or forwards as fast as possible. Neap, ebb or flood, and they must only move a small amount forwards or backwards. Then the next one is about where you can find information about the tides. So asking them when you need to find any information for boating, like the weather, where would you find it? Potential answers will probably be things like I'll look on my phone, I'll look on an app, I'll look at the weather forecast. Then explain that for tides we have something very similar called a tide table, and there's lots of different places that you can find that. In the next tide one, we talk a bit more about the differences of the different places that you can find it and what's the key information. But for this one, because it's one that they will definitely recognise as a site that they will hopefully have used before, using the BBC one. So loading up the BBC one for where your closest tide table is, giving them an example here, and asking them the key simple information of when is our next low tide. Obviously, it's written there for them in this case. When is our next high tide, and how high will it be using the information on here, and how low will our next low tide be? Then giving some scenarios. So we've got a tidal resource pack which gives both the general weather as they would probably know it from their phone apps. It gives them a tidal chart which talks about the high water and low water. It gives them wind, a bit of information about wind as well. And so saying that you're planning to do a paddleboarding trip, you want to be safe and responsible, so you're going to check the tidal information before you go. So splitting them into groups, giving them a different place, and then saying, look at the weather. What weather do you think will be best for paddleboarding? If you're going paddleboarding, you probably don't want to do it in the pouring rain and the driving wind. In the tides, because our paddleboards are quite light, we probably want to go for a time with a slack or a weak tide. So asking them to make it easy for them to look at one which is an hour either side of low water, so that they can have a specific thing that they're going to look at on the charts. And then looking at the wind on the second or the fourth chart, saying because they're lightweight, they'll be susceptible to wind. When we've piloted this, we've been surprised how easy it is that the cadets have been able to find this information without having had much experience of putting it before, which is great. But you might need to support them depending on that sort of level of expertise of the cadet. And there's also some possible example answers. It doesn't need to be exactly the same as the answers as the instructor resource, as long as they can give a good reasoning of why they chose that time on that day. That's the last of the full activities. If you want to talk about causes of tides, there is an optional activity that you can add on, especially if you have extra time, to talk about why we have tides. So talking about the moon's gravity and the sun's gravity. What you can do is have a balloon or a ball on the table, which represents the Earth, and then you tie on the moon and you tie on another object to be the sun. and you ask the moon to pull hard and move around. You ask the sun to pull a little bit and move around, and then you see how it pulls out on the balloon or the ball as you move around. But this is an optional one if you would like to do it. That is a very brief introduction